Hello and welcome to another episode of For Zion's Sake, the CUFI UK podcast. My name is Alex and I'm joined here by Alastair.
Hello.
And this week we're going to be talking about a number of different topics, looking at the Middle East conflict that's going on, how the UK has been drawn into that, and also looking at the definition of genocide and the 10 stages of it, and how that actually applies to what Hamas tried to do, or actually did do, on the 7th of October, and does not apply to Israel. But first of all, we're going to be looking at the UK and how they've been drawn in to the conflict in the Middle East, Alastair.
That's right. Well, as we've all seen on the news, I'm sure the UK and US did a joint operation last week in targeting the Houthis in Yemen. And this obviously follows the significant number of attacks by the Houthis on civilian vessels in the Red Sea.
Yeah. And
especially, by their own admission, they have been targeting vessels that are linked to Israel, travelling to and travelling from Israel, or vessels which have some association with Israel. And so, yes, it's very, very interesting indeed, because this has brought the UK into a conflict in the Middle East. I mean, obviously they have not given any indication whether or not this is going to be a longer-term operation against the Houthis, although Rishi Sunak hasn't ruled out that there will be more strikes.
Yeah.
But it certainly does. I mean, and they've also, not admitted that it is directly defending Israel.
Yeah.
However, whether or not they are going to admit it or not, it certainly does, either directly or indirectly, bring the UK into defending Israel militarily. And we're going to talk about why that is, because the Houthis are a terrorist organization.
Yep.
They are present in Yemen.
Yep.
They are a significant threat they are Iranian-backed, but they're a significant threat, of course, to trade and to, life here in the UK when it comes to fuel supply, food supply, other economic challenges that would occur if the Houthis were to continue this. And I think it's good to point out, I think have there been more than 26 vessels which have actually been struck by Hamas by the Houthis since the middle of November. So this is not just one or two threats. And it's funny, I said Hamas by slip of the tongue, because let's face it, there are some significant similarities between Hamas and the Houthis.
Yeah.
Hamas has condemned the UK and US strikes against the Houthis.
Yeah.
The Houthis have supported Hamas and have obviously condemned Israel, but they are a genocidal, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel terrorist group.
Yeah.
And they hate Israel. They want Israel destroyed.
Yeah.
And the UK has got Israel's back.
Yeah, exactly. Because the Houthis have directly attacked Israel by sending drones and missiles towards Israel, which have been shot down by both the UK and US in dealing with that. And obviously the UK is now striking. And the UK is basically saying, from their perspective, they're trying to protect world trade. They're trying, because a lot of boats now are having to go all the way around the Cape of South Africa. You're having to go all the way around Africa rather than going through the Suez Canal. And so it's basically adding on lots of time to shipments, lots of money. It's going to have a big effect. And that's what the UK is there to sort out. It's exactly the same as what was happening when Iran was attacking ships in the Gulf of Oman. Yeah. And so it's the same tactic being used because it's the same puppet master, which is Khamenei and Iran. Yeah.
This time in the last podcast, just a week ago, we were talking about, we were comparing the Israel strikes on Hamas with the UK's actions against, like, the Taliban, the targeted, which was targeting the terrorist groups and not the people of, in the case of the Taliban, Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And here we have a similar situation because we're saying about attacks in Yemen, but it's not against Yemen particularly.
No.
It's against the Houthis, which are a terrorist group in Yemen.
Yeah. And that's a key point, because there's a lot of now pro-Palestinian activists in London, in the US and so forth, who are now saying they're supporting Yemen. Actually, they're not supporting Yemen. They're supporting the Houthis, because the Houthis are against the government of Yemen. They've taken over the capital city. The government of Yemen has relocated to another city in the west of, the east of Yemen. And so the Houthis are a terrorist group who took over parts of Yemen. They own about 30% of the land area of Yemen and about 70% of the population. And they are ruling it with an iron fist.
Yeah.
If you're looking at numbers, there's more than...
do they own or do they occupy?
Well, occupy. Yeah, I shouldn't say own. Sorry, occupy. They occupy that land. I mean, when you look at the numbers on the devastation that's caused, we talk about the numbers in Gaza, where there's less than 30,000 people who have died so far in that conflict. And by the way, they're Hamas numbers. We don't know for certain what the numbers are. Well, in Yemen, because of the Houthis, since 2015, 80,000 children have starved to death, because the Houthis have basically taken over that area and restricted things. And that's just 80,000 children. When you look at the number of people who have been killed, it's over 150,000 people. This is the UN statistics. Over 150,000 people have been killed in direct conflict, and up to 375,000 people have been killed in total, either from starvation, from conflict, or from other lack of medical, and things like that. I mean, it is a far bigger catastrophe than the Gaza situation, and yet the world is not even aware of it. And then when Yemen attacks Israel and starts disrupting global shipping trade, you have the Houthis. Sorry, when the Houthis, even I had a slip of the tongue.
That's okay.
But when the Houthis do that, there are people here in the UK who are supporting the Palestinians. Then basically, it's like they're siding with another terror group rather than siding with their own country.
That's a very interesting point, because what we saw on Saturday, the protests in London, pro-Palestinian protests, which have been sympathising and supporting Hamas for weeks and 3 months now, by default are supporting the Houthis because they are, their core values or lack of morals are the same. And so that's actually, from a domestic point of view, a very worrying development, I think, because and it just illustrates the slippery slope of having no solid moral judgment on the situation. Because as soon as you start having inclinations of sympathy towards Hamas, you are then by default also, whether you realize it or not, supporting what the Houthis are doing. This is the statement which is on the Houthis flag. Okay? It says, this is their flag, it's in Arabic.
Their motto.
And it's their motto. And it translates, Allah is great, death to America, death to Israel, a curse upon the Jews, victory to Islam. That is their motto. So these are an anti-Semitic, anti-West, anti-Israel, genocidal, Jew-hating, Jew-cursing organization. They are anti the one true God. And they are, they also want Israel destroyed, just like Hamas does. So now, because we have, and we have to really, in the United Kingdom, it's so important that our government cracks down on support for Hamas, because otherwise support for the Houthis and for whoever comes along that is wanting to wipe out the Jews will find support. We must not allow that to fester. It is festering. It has festered. We're in a dire situation in this country now because of allowing support like this to go unchallenged. We've backed off. We've allowed it to solidify. And it also, I'll tell you how it also changes it. The protests on the streets have been against Israel. But now that the United Kingdom has is now directly involved in challenging, well, let's face what it is, fighting Israel's enemies, those same people who are on the streets chanting against Israel will now be chanting against our own country.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. It's the people who are supporting the Palestinians, unfortunately, many of them are supporting Hamas. Same here. The people who are saying they support Yemen, they're not supporting Yemen. They are supporting the Houthis. Both of them are terrorist organizations. I mean, you've read the Houthi slogan, their mantra. They, curse the Jews is their mantra. If you were to stand with the people of Yemen, you'd be standing with the Yemenese government, which is against the Houthis. If you were standing with the people, if you were standing with the Palestinians, you wouldn't be standing with Hamas. You'd be standing with the innocent civilians who are under the iron fist of Hamas, and who Hamas is responsible for all of the deaths in Gaza because of the massacre and the attempted genocide that they carried out on the 7th of October. It's like, but you're right. What you're saying hits the nail on the head. In this country, in the West, we have a growing number of people who are not only anti-Israel, they're anti the West. And they will support any terrorist organization. Unfortunately, because actually we know from statistics that there are many people who actually have a similar ideology to the terrorists themselves. There's statistics that we saw last week which were looking at the Muslim world and how they see the 7th of October massacre, and it's only 6% of the Muslim world, of Arab states, of the Arab world, I should say, not the Muslim world entirely, but the Arab states, where they see Hamas's attack as illegitimate. 6%.
Yeah.
The vast majority see it as a legitimate attack, but there's about 20 or 30% who see them as a legitimate attack, but they could have done a different
The reason I didn't want to correct you on that, because actually some people might say, well, no, it is you're talking about a Muslim ideology here. The reason I corrected you only because it was actually an Arab organization which surveyed Arab countries.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry, it was a poll looking at Arab countries. Obviously, the Muslim world is over it's 1 point something billion people. Yeah. This was looking at 500 million. The Arab states, which cover about 500 million people. And it was done, the polling was done by an independent Middle Eastern group, which polls them all the time about different things. But this is just an eye-opening thing that actually, because of this indoctrination, unfortunately, because of the indoctrination through Islam, which is against, a lot of the ideology, it goes against the Jews, there is this lack of moral clarity when it comes to attacks against Israel. Like, when we saw the Hamas massacres, that is pure anti-Semitic hatred. It is an attempted genocide. And unfortunately, it is now being supported en masse. Yes. And that's why we're seeing it in this country, where you are seeing people who are openly supporting Hamas, openly supporting the Houthis. But the difference is this. The Houthis are not outlawed in the UK.
No.
Actually, it's not illegal to support a group which calls for death to America, death to Israel, and curse upon the Jews. Like, it is legal in this country to support that, which is absolutely absurd.
Yes.
Whereas Hamas, it is illegal to support them, and yet we are seeing open support for them and the police doing nothing.
Yeah.
And so it is very troubling. And by the way, in America as well, the Houthis were removed from the terror list in 2021 by President Biden, less than a month after he became president. Wow. So President Trump actually outlawed them as a terror group. President Biden, a month after he became president, took them off the list. Now he's thinking about putting them back on it because obviously they're now at war with them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it shows, I think, doesn't matter what side of politics you're on, I think that shows a lack of understanding of the situation. And I think that was a bad move.
Yes.
And so hopefully he will correct that now. But the damage has already been done. They've had 3 years or so where they've been able to, where basically what that terror, taking them off the terror list, meant they were allowed access back into global trading systems, banking systems, and so forth, in order for them to actually increase their profits.
Yes.
And as we can see, they're now using their newfound money to attack Israel. And this is the same as with the Iran deal. We go, when we look at what Iran is doing, Iran is funding the Houthis. Well, there are politicians, even our own government, governments here in the West, who are funding Iran to the tune of billions of pounds a year because they do not understand the situation with Iran, where Iran is using that money to build up its arsenal in order to attack Israel and attack, in this case...
Well, I was going to say that it now... We've spoken about Iran and spoken about, the backing of these proxy groups, although actually they're not just proxies, they are directly trying to disrupt the Middle East. And now here we have the United Kingdom taking military action against the Iranian agenda. The results of really years and years of a weakness towards Iran. And this is the situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah, exactly.
But the UK, UK ministers since the UK strikes have said that it isn't related to the Israel-Gaza conflict.
Yeah.
But after what we've just described, it is. It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And one thing that we can take from the military strikes last week is that a line has been drawn in the sand of the Middle East.
Yeah.
Whatever might transpire now in terms of the Houthis, actually, the UK, their primary reason for doing so might have been, as they've said, is to protect the trade routes. But we know that the enemy of United Kingdom and the United States and United States of America is the same shared enemy of Israel.
Yeah.
And that line has been drawn, and I think we can be appreciative and thankful, but that we are living in a nation that is on that particular side of the line.
Yeah.
But we must pray, intently that will continue.
Yeah.
Because who knows what the future will hold here in the UK.
Yeah.
And, a future UK government, whether or not we will be as strong. But I think we could take a lot from that and be positive that the UK has taken some action. But we need to pray for our leaders that they will have wisdom.
Yeah, definitely.
In doing so.
Yeah.
Also, I think it is tremendously, from a biblical perspective, very, very interesting indeed. Because anything that is related to Israel, and any sort of development in the Middle East should waken our attention. And, we talk about the Tarshish nations, and the Tarshish nations have often been attributed to a coalition of maritime countries that come together in order to, in the last days, to protect trade in the Middle East, defending Israel. So when you think about that, this might be a foreshadowing or something of something ultimately further down the line.
Yeah.
But it should quicken us to really pray into this situation and ask the Lord just to give us discernment in regarding the times in which we're living.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why standing with Israel in this nation is so important. Another reason why it is so important, because we have to make sure that Britain, which of course has so often been associated with that Tarshish coalition of maritime nations, will be on the right side of history.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I 100% agree. And we, as you were saying, we need to pray for our leaders, but we also need to continue to tell our MPs and elected officials to stand with Israel.
Yes.
And obviously, the Houthis are different to Hamas. There is a difference there in what happened and what's going on and how our government is supporting both Israel and also dealing with the Houthis. But looking back at we were talking about it last week, about the 100 days since the massacre, or actually I should say me and Des were talking about that on a separate video. But it's been 100 days now since the massacre that took place on the 7th of October, where Hamas terrorists, literally butchered whole families, killed, murdered, maimed, raped, everything you can imagine in the most horrific way possible. And so we here at CUFI have been writing, we've launched a campaign 100 days since the massacre, where we're encouraging our supporters to write to MPs, to get involved, to tell the MPs how they feel about Israel, and to encourage MPs to stand with Israel now more than ever, because there's still over 100 people who are, I think it's 132 at the time of recording, 132 people who are still being held by Hamas, and they are predominantly Israeli civilians who should not be in Gaza and should not be doing this. And also, the war would be over if Hamas just released the hostages and stopped fighting. Right?
So you can find details about that in the link in the description.
Yep.
And also, if you visit our homepage at www.cufi.org.uk, then you can find out. Click on the banner which says about the 100 days since the 7th of October massacre, and email your MP, please, even if you have done so over the past 3 months about issues we raised earlier. This is a new opportunity to really continue to push towards the UK government and opposition making a continued support for Israel, but more specifically to make sure that international pressure is put on on Hamas for the release of the hostages.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and it's very easy to do. It takes just a couple of minutes. I used the system myself, emailed my MP, and received a reply from him just the other day. And so it's a really good way of interacting with your politician. Even if your MP is anti-Israel, please do write to them. And obviously, this only applies to people in the UK. And obviously, if you're in any other country, find out how you can write to your elected officials and write to them and tell them how you feel, because it really is important to get your message to your elected officials so that they stand with Israel and stand on the right side of history.
Yeah. And also, if you would like to support CUFI by making a donation of any amount, then we would greatly appreciate your support by that method. And there are opportunities to make single one-off gifts or set up a monthly standing order, because it all helps us here at Christians United for Israel to make this stand with Israel, and to make sure that, as I said before, that Britain does stand on the right side of history. You can make that donation by going to www.cufi.org.uk/donate. Thank you for standing with us.
Yeah, thank you.
And now we're going to talk about the 10 stages of genocide.
Yeah.
And we wanted to share this with our listeners because there's been a lot of talk about genocide over the last couple of weeks.
Yep.
Amazingly directed at Israel.
Yeah.
Rather than the conversation, the international conversation being aimed at Hamas.
Exactly.
Would you believe it? The table was turned.
Yeah.
You know, wrong and evil has been flipped on its side, and actually Israel, which did not start this war and has not done the things which it is being accused of by anti-Semites, is at the court of the International Courts of Justice, The Hague, and really we want to bring the conversation. We spoke about that particularly last week. But we want to bring the conversation into the genocide committed by Hamas.
Yeah, and I think it should be pointed out to people, when we actually came up with this, we didn't come up with it. This is from the Holocaust Memorial Trust. But when I read this, I showed it to you, and I said, just look at this and see how it applies to Hamas. And this was weeks ago.
Yeah.
It was before Christmas. We were talking about how Hamas's actions were the equivalent of a genocide or an attempted genocide.
Yes.
And so we had that on our minds.
Yes.
And then suddenly, out of nowhere, South Africa comes in, suddenly accusing Israel of genocide.
Yeah.
And so it shows how the enemy is trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. It is an attempt by Israel's enemies to paint Israel in a bad light, to libel Israel. And what it means is, when any person who sees Israel on the news, they will think of the word genocide. So they will associate Israel and genocide because they are uninformed and they do not know the truth.
And actually, the very fact that they have been taken to court is enough to equip the anti-Semites We see it all in social media saying, "Oh, they have been taken to court on genocide."
They are committing genocide.
They have tried. They've charged. They've tried, and they've already found them guilty. Theoretically,
in their own minds.
In their own minds.
Yeah.
So
actually,
that's
when we
why
go through this,
South Africa is their actions have been so destructive.
Yeah.
But we want the conversation to be focused now on Hamas, because we need to start accusing Hamas of a definition of genocide. Which, by the way, we have to understand also that the definition of genocide, according to international law, also includes the intent of genocide. So that is even actions where genocide, because we think genocide as being a big mass, killing of a people group. Well, I mean, 1,200 people is a lot of people, of course. But we obviously understand the largest genocide in history is the Holocaust, a much, much bigger number. But actually, the intent of those perpetrating it is actually the same, because if they had the means, it would be even more. So actually, Hamas is fulfilling the criteria, as we're going to have a look here, of genocide.
Yeah.
This criteria it's not actually the criteria, it is the steps. So it's looking at the process in which genocide begins and intensifies. It is published by the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, and it was actually based on research by Dr. Gregory Stanton of Genocide Watch. And it says that some of these steps can be in various order, but they are created to build the climate in which genocide can take place. So let's go through them. We'll go through them fairly swiftly, but we just want to highlight these. So let's just think. Okay, this has been produced by the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust without the events of 7th of October even having occurred. So let's just think of it that way.
Yeah.
Okay, this is something that we are now applying to the present times. Classification, stage 1. The differences between people are not respected. There's a division of us and them, which can be carried out using stereotypes or excluding people who are perceived to be different.
Yeah. So that, I would say, is what happens within, not just actually from Hamas, but within Palestinian society. If you look at Israel is accused of apartheid. It's, again, the enemy's trying to accuse Israel of doing something they themselves are doing. The lie becomes truth, the truth becomes lie, that kind of thing. Anyway, the classification in Israel, whether you are Jew, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a Christian, whatever it is, you are able to ride a bus together, go to school together. When you're in a hospital, you'll have different nurses from different places. In the Palestinian territories, Jews are not allowed. If there's examples of Westerners driving into Palestinian towns with an Israeli car and an Israeli flag on the car, and they have been attacked and almost lynched because as soon as Palestinians see, or mainly young men in those areas, see an Israeli car, they see it as an Israeli and we need to attack the Israeli because it's an us and them thing.
Yes.
They've got that us and them attitude. A Palestinian, well, we know there's literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who cross the border into Israel every day and go and work in Israel. They are not attacked. They are not lynched because there isn't that us and them thing.
Yes.
So I would actually say the classification there is actually not just from Hamas, but across the whole of the Palestinian territories.
Yeah, ironic, because Israel is falsely accused of apartheid, which sort of implies a classification system, discriminatory system, and yet if there is apartheid in the region, it's actually by the Palestinian regimes.
Exactly. I mean, Jews cannot pray on the Temple Mount, for example, but Muslims can pray at the Western Wall. So think about that.
Stage 2 is symbolization.
Yeah.
This is a visual manifestation of hatred. Jews in Nazi-occupied Europe were forced to wear the Yellow Star of David.
No,
and that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I'd say I wouldn't say this is so much the case in like, there's no Jews in Gaza, so for example, they wouldn't be classifying them in that way. But what we have seen from Palestinian activists here in the UK, from Hamas supporters, they've gone around to Jewish communities in London and started marking them as Stars of David and things like that to highlight businesses that are Jewish to be protested.
And also Israeli businesses.
Yes, exactly.
So even companies like, there is a company which provides materials for Israeli defense, or apparently provides materials for Israeli defense systems, and that has been targeted in a way which is not actually just it's not like anti-Israel, it is an anti-Semitic act, spraying Star of Davids and saying anti-Semitic things against them. But that is actually where they do not make draw lines or anything like that.
Because it's even like Jewish bakeries that have been attacked, and targeted, and it's that sort of thing. I mean, for example, when the 7th of October attacks happened, there was a large Free Palestine graffiti that was put in, a predominantly Jewish area of London. They were targeting the Jewish community, not Israel.
Yeah.
It was that sort of targeting. So that I think there applies to stage 2.
Stage 3 is discrimination. The dominant group denies civil rights or even citizenship to identified groups. It cites the Nuremberg laws that stripped Jews of their German citizenship and made it illegal for them to do many jobs or to marry German non-Jews. Well, there aren't many Jews in Gaza. In fact, there are no Jews in Gaza. And, and I'm serious about this point, the only Jews in Gaza are those who are hostage.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's that is discrimination. And I think actually discrimination kind of goes in with classification and symbolization. I think they're sort of, well, obviously these are the steps moving towards more discrimination, but that discrimination happens. The same thing I was saying about the Temple Mount, where you're not allowed to pray there if you're Jewish. The different things, like you're not allowed to own land. For example, the Palestinian Authority have made it law that you're not allowed to sell land to a Jew. Yeah. That is a law within the Palestinian territories. And also, the Palestinian Authority have basically said any future Palestinian state, like if the West Bank becomes a Palestinian state, there will be no Jews allowed. Yes. So they are discriminating against people based on their race. Look in Israel, 20% of Israel is Palestinian or Muslim or Arab, whatever you want to classify them as. They're classified as different things depending on their own definition. So,
Stage 4 is dehumanization. Those perceived as different are treated with no form of human rights or personal dignity. Yeah. And you see this from the lips of those who hate Israel, calling, I don't even want to repeat some of the things, but you hear them calling like Jews things like such as vermin, which actually is what the Nazis refer to the Jews as.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing I noticed when I saw the IDF video of the Hamas massacres last week, the main thing I saw the terrorists calling the Jews was dogs. They used other things as well, apes, pigs, other derogative sort of things, but you dogs was so clear, like they would murder someone, die you dog. That kind of saying was coming out, like they were dehumanizing them to the point where they had no sympathy or anything towards them. And so that, and by the way, as they were carrying out that attack, they were carrying out an attempted genocide. That was what we were watching. Yeah. And that's the point we're trying to make.
Because actually that hatred, it wasn't just something which started on the 7th of October. It was there, and obviously we saw genocide being carried out. Yeah. But it started with that sort of embedded hate.
Yeah.
So stage 5 is organization. Yeah. Genocides are always planned regimes of hatred, often train those who go on to carry out the destruction of a people.
That's a clear example of Hamas.
Yes.
Look at that.
Yes, and also the Houthis and also Hezbollah.
Yep.
It's organized, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there are other terrorist groups within Gaza, not just Hamas, is Palestinian Islamic Jihad, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the UK, and you illustrated the US earlier, calling out terrorist groups and banning terrorist groups is significant, because whilst it doesn't address the ideology behind those, that's another matter.
Yeah.
It does at least define that this is not a tolerated organization, and if it can disrupt the operational side of a terrorist organization, then it does limit its effectiveness.
Yeah.
It also brings condemnation towards it.
Mm.
And that's why it is important. But here we have terrorist groups which, if they did not have funding pumped into them from the West, would not be an organization, or they would be a weaker organization.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's really important.
Yeah, and obviously with Hamas, it says that genocides are always planned regimes of hatred. Well, Hamas is literally that. It's a regime of hatred. It trains up its children from, they do summer camps with hundreds of thousands of children being trained up in military, to use weapons and to carry out. Their only purpose is to attack Israel. And we know from what we saw on 7th of October, it wasn't just military upon military. It was militants against civilians. Murdering people in their homes, whole families, children, whether they were young or old, they went in there and carried out that attack because of the organization of Hamas. If Hamas wasn't if there was no organization, that wouldn't even be a thing.
Yes.
But as we know, it's fifth on the stage.
Yes.
So,
Stage 6 is polarization.
Propaganda
begins to be spread by hate groups. The Nazis used the newspaper Der Stürmer to spread and incite messages of hate about Jewish people.
Again, Hamas is doing the same thing.
Hamas is doing the
They've
same
got
thing.
Al-Quds news that literally spreads hatred. That has the same anti-Semitic cartoons which were being used during the Holocaust. They've got pictures of Jews murdering Palestinians. All these different things they've got within their propaganda regime or machine, which is the newspaper. They've obviously got television now, which is a lot more prominent than it was back in
and which for a crazy reason appears on our BBC channel and on Al Jazeera. They are citing their sources are Hamas sources.
I know, it's absurd. It's as if just imagine during World War II the BBC was actually quoting Nazi officials and things like that to justify what was happening in the Holocaust. It just would never happen. But
propaganda is huge, and now we have social media, which is being used for propaganda, as well, which did not exist in the 1930s.
Yeah,
and so in some ways, I think propaganda is
it's actually polarization.
That's what it does.
Yeah, but it polarizes. Yeah, that's what
it polarizes. Yeah,
because the thing is, it's like with the propaganda. You are right; it is propaganda, but it's like the polarization of it. The fact that when we see it all the time, we have interactions with people who hate us, hate the Jews, and so forth. They've had their worldview completely shifted. It is polar opposites. That's what's happened. Where every good thing, like Israel, could literally go into Gaza and give food to everyone and medical aid and not have attacked anyone, and yet they still would see Israel as trying to poison everyone and murder everyone. Like, do you see what I'm saying? They've got this polarizing worldview, which is done through propaganda to the point where they do not see reality anymore. They only see it from their lens of extremist hatred. And that's what the Nazis had. This is what Hitler managed to do. He managed to convince ordinary Germans that all of their problems were caused by the Jews, and we must eliminate the Jews. That was what they were taught, and that's the same as what Hamas is taught. Every problem the Palestinians have is Israel's fault, and we must murder the Jews. That is what Hamas are taught. Or Hamas teach.
Absolutely. Stage 7, preparation. Perpetrators plan the genocide. They often use euphemisms such as the Nazis phrase "the final solution" to cloak their intentions. Acts of genocide are disguised as self-defense if there is an ongoing armed conflict or civil war. Wow, isn't that the truth?
That's a massive one, yeah. I mean, let's look at the first point. The phrases "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." That is a literal call to genocide.
It is.
The final solution was a call to genocide. Yes.
Which terms which are used widely. And yes, they are to cloak their intentions. That's why we need to call it out. And that's why also the definition of anti-Semitism, which was developed several years ago, is so important, because it helped navigate some of these less obvious forms of anti-Semitism. As it says here, that cloak their intentions. This is interesting. Acts of genocide are disguised as self-defense. Well,
look at that.
That is rife, really, that argument.
By
literally, those who hate Israel.
I know. I've heard journalists say, I've heard politicians even say that Hamas is justified to attack Israel or Israelis because of what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. First of all, Israel is not committing genocide. Israel is not doing all these atrocities which it's being accused of. And even if it was, there is still never an excuse for thousands of militants to flood into civilian territories and murder entire families. There is never, ever, ever any justification for that. And yet we are hearing that justification. We are literally hearing it where people are, for example, Palestinian politicians are refusing to condemn Hamas because Hamas was justified in murdering and butchering babies. That is absolutely absurd. And so that is, stage 7 there is a massive one. And it shows actually how far along, we've got within,
how far we've come.
with the stages of genocide.
Now, stage 8 is persecution. Victims are identified because of their ethnicity or religion, and death lists are drawn up. People are sometimes segregated into ghettos, deported or starved, and property is often expropriated. Genocidal massacres begin. Now, for years now, the Jewish people have been persecuted. We don't use the word persecuted often, actually, when it comes to attacks on Jews, but that is what it is. And when there have been terrorist attacks in Israel, it has been, it's sort of like being the birth pangs of what we saw on the 7th of October. Which is why we've been spending years, trying to urge our government and that to call out and condemn and just to stand with Israel in solidarity, because Israel has been defending itself, but just to really stand with Israel and the Jewish people in that.
I agree. I think with that as well, obviously with this persecution, this is something where Hamas is not the holding power in a way. Like with the Nazis, they controlled Germany. The Jewish population was subject to the Nazi government. Israel isn't under that sort of thing, so it's not exactly the same. This is why the genocide. This is why Hamas is not able to commit its genocide, because it is not in power over the Jewish people. If it was, well, we already know what would happen because we saw on 7th of October. But with the persecution, this is where it goes from Hamas, but actually being the wider pro-Palestinian movement, which is actually an anti-Israel movement. The aim of the pro-Palestinian or the anti-Israel groups are to destroy Israel and to wipe out the Jewish people from the land of Israel. But the thing is, look at that, the segregation, basically taking away people's property, all that thing. Well, look at what the BDS movement is trying to do. They're trying to limit Israel's trading. They're trying to cut off trade routes, because the BDS movement is not just boycotts, it's also divestment and sanctions. It's an attempt to segregate Israel, to cut it off from trade, to basically, what am I trying to say, suffocate Israel and isolate it from the rest of the world. And that goes to the point where you have teachers here in the UK who refuse to help Jewish students because they're Jewish, and because I'm boycotting Israel, I'm not allowed to help a Jewish student. That kind of thing. It becomes this persecution. It is persecution against the Jews. The fact that, we know Israelis who have come to London and not been allowed on a bus because they had a Star of David.
Yes.
And the bus driver said, you can't come on here because you're Jewish.
Yeah.
You know, that is persecution.
Yes.
So,
it
you
is.
know,
It is. And looking at it on a bigger scale, when it comes to regimes like Iran,
yes,
they use the words like liberate Jerusalem or liberate Al-Quds is what they say, but they mean to liberate Jerusalem. So actually they want control.
Yeah, exactly.
And yes, at the moment we are discussing Hamas, which is a terror group which isn't going to win. Iran isn't going to win, by the way, either. But their goal is to control Jerusalem. And could you imagine the Jewish people under a regime like Iran? Well, no. I mean, it's not going to get there, but that is their intent. And that's why we have to call it out now before, the Iranian regime attempts. Yeah. Stage 9 is extermination. The hate group murders their identified victims in a deliberate and systematic campaign of violence. Well, of course, we saw that fulfilled on the 7th of October.
Yeah, and I think going back to Iran, I mean, the Iranian regime, Khomeini, who is the head of the regime, the Ayatollah, he literally wants to obtain a nuclear weapon so he can wipe out and exterminate the Zionist entity, as he calls it, which is Israel, the Jewish people, because he believes if he can wipe out the Jews, it will bring about the last day, which is something which is taught in the Hadith. So, it is an attempt to exterminate the Jewish people. That is what he is trying to do. So actually, and by the way, Iran heavily funds Hamas. They completely control PIJ. They, a lot of the groups, Houthis. Which are the Houthis, Hezbollah in Lebanon, they've got inroads into Syria and to other areas. Like, basically, they are the puppet master of all of this, which is they are trying to commit a genocide, but they are unable. But as we can see, there's lots of different areas where they are well down the path of the 10 stages of genocide.
Stage 10 is denial. Now, this is stage 10, perhaps because after the Holocaust, there was, and there is.
Holocaust denial.
There is probably more so now than there might have been many years ago, is denial. The perpetrators or later generations deny the existence of any crime. Evidence is destroyed and witnesses are intimidated. There has been an increase in Holocaust denial online in recent years. That's what it's saying.
And by the way, I would say Holocaust denial predominantly now, yes, there is some right-wing extremists. There's definitely some Westerners who are Holocaust deniers, but predominantly it's actually coming from the Muslim world now. And so it shows the same anti-Semitic hatred there. Where they don't want to give any sympathy to the Jewish people because they hate them.
So, and they choose to deny.
They choose to deny
as well. It's not it's not out of ignorance, or lack of information or education. I mean, there are some situations where literally children are growing up not aware of the Holocaust, but I would say that this is referring to the deliberate denial of it happening. Believing a lie. And the worrying thing right now, this is referring to denying the Holocaust, which happened, last century, finished in 1945. There are people denying what happened on the 7th of October, 2023.
Exactly. We see it online right now. People are denying what happened. And as you said, they are saying it was Israel that carried out these atrocities. They're saying that Hamas isn't responsible. This was a false flag event where Israel, killed their own people to use it as an excuse to then commit genocide in Gaza. It is all lies. And it's not just lies. It is it's evil. It's pure evil lies. The evidence is clear. We know that Hamas is responsible for this attempted genocide. For anyone living in that area at that time, it was a genocide because Hamas didn't show sympathy to anyone in those areas. They either kidnapped them or killed them. That was basically what happened, or attempted to kill them. 6,000 people were injured in these attacks as well.
And going back to the persecution, the victims were identified because of their ethnicity or religion.
Yes.
That is really important to point out.
Yeah.
That, the victims of the 7th of October were murdered because they're Israeli and because they're Jewish.
Exactly.
And the perpetrators made it very, very clear that is the case, as is the case with Israel's short history as a state, and even throughout the history over thousands of years.
Yeah.
It's because they were identified as being Jewish.
Yeah, exactly. And we know that the way Hamas treated hostages in the tunnels was different depending on their nationality, whether they were Israeli or Jewish. And we know that some of the testimonies from, I think it was Thai workers who were kidnapped and held hostage, they said they were treated a lot better than the Israelis who were in the same situation as them. It's because of this, going back to the dehumanization factor, where Hamas see them as less than human, and that's it shows that. So hopefully people can see from this that the 10 stages there are either being committed by Hamas or by the wider anti-Israel sort of spirit, I should say, but the movement there. And I think it is eye-opening. Like, when I read this, I was actually doing research into the Holocaust. I was looking at, looking for information about how we can educate people on the Holocaust. And actually it pointed me to what was happening with Hamas and Israel. And I think it shows that, I personally believe that you cannot have a full understanding of the Holocaust without having both a biblical understanding, but also an understanding on Israel and the Jewish people and God's plans and purposes for them. Because the same hatred that existed during the Holocaust is the same hatred that exists today with Hamas. And that's why we need to stand up against it, because Hitler, anti-Semitism did not die with the Nazis.
Yes.
Hitler was not the end of the Holocaust. Actually, that attempt to wipe out the Jews has been happening long before Hitler, and it's still happening today. We have to always recognize it for the evil that it is.
Yes.
So the only way to effectively combat any of this is with the Word of God.
Yes.
And obviously, as the Holocaust Remembrance Day is coming up next week.
Yes, it is.
That's
right.
That?
Well, I mean, it's been a helpful reminder, both in understanding the context of what's happening now, but also this should reinforce the importance of us having a clear understanding of what happened in the Holocaust and the anti-Semitism, of course, trends, the pattern that existed, during, as I say, the worst genocide in history. And we really do need to equip ourselves with that mindset that you just said about having a biblical understanding, to recognizing the same evil and the same hate. But we can only recognize that if we have inputted within our own understanding what that evil looks like and what the lessons are from it.
Yeah.
And that's why Holocaust education is so important, because it's through effective Holocaust education that actually people do take on board those lessons and hopefully don't repeat it.
Yeah.
And also don't allow it to be repeated. Don't stand by if you see the traits which led to the Holocaust. So here at CUFI, we do believe that Holocaust education is very important. We actually have a Holocaust education resources page on our website. The link is in the description below. So I would just invite people to go and visit it, have a browse and select things which will just be a helpful reminder to you of the importance of remembering the victims of the Holocaust. And we've got a few ideas that we've created to help people do that this year. We have these candles, these Never Again candles. These have been produced here at CUFI exclusively. They are something that we are offering in our store, the CUFI store. Again, the link is in the description below. And they come in 2 sizes. And we're offering these for people who would like to light a candle on Holocaust Memorial Day. Of course, not only for Holocaust Memorial Day, we have the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is what Israel Remembers in May. So there are other occasions as well to use them. We also have this mini book, The Sin of Silence. This is a wonderful pocket book. It's been written by Pastor John Hagee. It's just the right size, really, just to have a real overview of the Holocaust and some of the testimonies of people affected by the Holocaust and some of these key messages that we've been talking about. I say it's not a large book, but it is full of some really, really valuable information called The Sin of Silence. Of course, as you can tell from the title, the message is there.
Yeah.
It's a reminder of not to be silent in the face of evil.
Yeah.
This is a mini booklet that we are providing or we're giving away to all of our members.
Yep.
New members. So current members will have already received this pack. And there's some other books as well. Why Christians Should Support Israel, The Promised Land, Israel 70 Years of Miracles, and The War Against the Jews. These are free to all members who make a member is a supporter that takes out a monthly donation of any amount.
Yep.
So we're very glad to give those as a resource. Members also receive this lapel pin badge, Christians United for Israel, with the Union flag and Israel flag on. And the reason we provide these to our members is really we want to bless you with tools that will help you in your stand with Israel and the Jewish people. And this one particular is, of course, very pertinent for all the things that we're discussing at this time. As I would say, actually, also the war against the Jews, because this looks at other forms of anti-Semitism, attacks on Israel and the Jewish people throughout history, including the modern state of Israel, of course.
Yeah, and all of these books are exclusive to CUFI and exclusive to our members. So if you would like to receive them, you can become a member with CUFI, which is anyone who makes a monthly donation to CUFI UK for any amount. But if you pray about it and consider how you can support the ministry, because we do lots of outworkings, whether it's Holocaust education, obviously standing with Israel, lobbying the government, that kind of thing. But we're also supporting Israel in a number of different avenues as well, physically with humanitarian aid as well. So if you do want to support CUFI, support this podcast, please do consider becoming a member. So go to www.cufi.org.uk/donate and you can become a member of CUFI that way.
Well, thank you very much for joining us for this podcast. We've appreciated your company. We are thankful for your support. And of course, another way you can support is by liking and sharing this podcast on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. It is important that we get the word out. And so by liking and sharing it, you're helping us to achieve that. So until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. We're going to continue praying for the peace of Jerusalem and continue to speak out for Zion's sake. God bless you.